I don't know which is harder, working out this weather or working on this podcast. Tonight I'm going to do a review of a book. It's called A Coward If I Return, A Hero If I Fall. It's by Neil Richardson, and it's a book about the First World War and the Irish participation in that war. Um, Basically what the book is about, it's a collection of different stories of all the Irish people that participated, mainly men, who participated in the First World War that started back in 1914 and lasted until about 1918, 1919. What's very poignant about it is not the fact that there was an awful lot of Irish in it, but it also coincided with the events in the 1916 Easter Rising. And that brought into perspective the whole relationship, the whole one-sided relationship between Ireland and Britain. At the beginning of the war in 1914, for a start, there was already a lot of Irish people serving in the British Army at the time. You had the likes of the Connacht Rangers that were serving in India at the time, and they were shipped back to France at the start of the war, and they formed a BEF. And the whole point of the British Expeditionary Force was to halt the advancing German army that had made its way through Belgium and had invaded France. And the idea of the BEF was to punch a hole through the advancing armies so that the horses could ride through and cause mayhem in the back, and so frustrating and slowing down the whole German advance. For the Irish, when it first started out, thousands and thousands of Irish young men, from west of Ireland and from all over Ireland and the north as well, they all joined up in their thousands. And mainly it was down to the fact that Ireland was a very quiet, monotonous place to live in at the time. There was no adventure, and there was no real economy as such. So a lot of people were poor. So the opportunity to go to war and make some money was the thing that was done for many hundreds of years. For example, in the Connacht Rangers, they actually fought Napoleon in 1798, and the precursors to the Royal Irish Regiment, they actually fought in the charge of the Light Brigade. So traditionally, there was always strong support to support England whenever there was a war. And furthermore, at the time politically, you had Redmond, who was head of the Irish Independence Party, and they were the Popular Party, and he was promoting the idea that the Irishmen should serve the British Army and go to war on behalf of the British Army, because it would lay a better, stronger case for Irish independence. Be that as it may, Redmond himself, closer to the end of the war, he himself actually joined the Royal Irish Regiment, and he was promoted as a colonel. And as bad as it was in Ireland after 1916 towards the fighting in the First World War, Redmond was witnessed many situations where soldiers from the north and the south worked hand in hand to combat the enemy, and so much so that even when he died, there was a Unionist guard of honor at his funeral. But why was it? Why was he so reviled after the war? Or why was it that so many, after the war, there was no victory parades? The reason for that was because back in 1916, when the rising started, it really, firstly, obviously the people did not like the 1916 Rising for what it stood for. They thought it was cowardly. They thought it was against the right thing to do. But given the fact that at the same time in the Somme, some 50,000 Irishmen were being slaughtered over the 3 months in that particular battle. So not only was after the Rising were the leaders of the Rising being shot, Ireland was being put under martial law, and also hundreds, thousands of letters were being sent to many, many families throughout the country saying that their son or their father or their brother had just died in the war. So that time after the 16 Rising, there was a period of introspection on behalf of the Irish people. We started to realise that the war was very one-sided in favour of the English, and we were literally fighting their war for them, and that we were it just brought into perspective the whole relationship between Britain and Ireland, and the more those death notices were being sent back to the families, you could only imagine that people were pushing for independence from England at that point. Also, back in 1914, there was no such thing as conscription. In Ireland, there was a fear of conscription, but it never happened. But it did actually happen after 1917, 1918. But at that stage, it was a very hard sell, and nobody was going to go for that. And as a result, we got our independence from it. So what happened to all those Irish people that did that came back from the war? Well, you had a lot of war wounded. You had people who had lost their limbs, who were severely traumatized, blinded by gas and what have you. And when they were returned home to this the situation that Ireland was in, like, a lot of them ended up being thrown out of their families. Families turned their backs on them. They ended up becoming vagrants. I don't know where the workhouse is still available for them, but there was definitely no social welfare, and they didn't last very long after that. As for the end of the war, people, men returning who were fit to work and who just wanted to have a quiet life, it didn't work out that way for them either, on the grounds that Irish employers who were mainly Republican, did not like the idea of British Army soldiers working for them. And furthermore, anybody who was amenable to British Army workers, it just wasn't going to happen, because they just didn't want that kind of trouble. And also, Ireland was in an economic downturn at the time, so jobs were not available for those returning British soldiers. Some managed to remain in the British Army, and they went on to fight in the Second World War, and they managed to emigrate they also emigrated to America, to New Zealand, Australia, and where have you, never to return. Also, those that came back may have chosen to fight in the Civil War. You had those who were pro-treaty. The majority of them went on to form the backbone of the new National Army, and they also started the Navy and the Air Corps. And well, they're still here today, and we have a proud tradition with them. And unfortunately, for those that fought who were anti-treaty, not only were they bombed out of the forecourts, but afterwards a lot of them were imprisoned. There was a hunger strike, and when they finally got released, you can only imagine the amount of bad blood that was there after they were returned into public civil life. So it was a very interesting book. It covers the three different battles of Ypres, and it covers the battle in the Somme, and it covers the battle in Gallipoli as well. Some points to note. One thing I liked about the book is I realised that Ireland had some fighter aces that were ranked in the top 10. There was about two or three of them who ranked in top 10 in the First World War. Also, the largest number of people to die in the Irish Sea was the sinking of the RMS Leinster, with over 569 souls on board. They were torpedoed by a German U-boat, and I also liked the whole tactics behind it. Like for example, at the very start of the war, when Germany was advancing into France, Britain sent in their British Expeditionary Force, comprising of the Connacht Rangers, and those soldiers were hardy. They were experienced. They were battle hardened, and when they came in contact with the enemy, they really fought valiantly and with distinction, and a lot of them got medals for what they did. They were beaten back, however, and they were beaten almost all the way to Paris, until they got back to a place called Ypres. There they were able to consolidate with the other forces, like the French and the British, and they were able to draw a line and halt the German advance. It was the first Battle of Ypres that we see the introduction of industrial scale warfare, and it's just staggering to realize the hundreds of thousands of millions of soldiers that fought in just those battles. Like for example, the Battle of Ypres. You had the Battle of the Somme, which lasted only 3 months, and over was it 250,000? No, 350,000 Allied soldiers were killed over the 3 months, and over 400,000 German soldiers were killed in those 3 months in the Somme. That's 750,000 soldiers who literally had to fight hand-to-hand combat, constant artillery barrages, machine gun fire, gas. Everything was thrown at each other, and to survive those battles, like, it wasn't down to experience or trained soldiery. It was down to sheer blind luck, and I hope we never see such warfare like that again. Just to realize the number of people that died in that First World War, and the scale of death that was there, it's incredible. And just from the Irish perspective, it was even more poignant for the Irish to realize that the losses and the cost that it was for independence. And you can understand from our independence at the time that we were deeply nationalist. Like when the Second World War first broke out, we did not. We chose to remain neutral, primarily because in the First World War, we all literally were climbing over ourselves to try and get into that war. This time around, it was a harder sell, and because of that, we are who we are today because of it. That's all I have to say. Take care.